introduction. My name is Anish Dey. I lead the energy sector for KPMG globally. And with me, I have Christian Rakos, President of World Bioenergy Association, and Sagun Saxena, CIO, Chief Innovation Officer of KOKO Networks, which are doing, both the organizations are doing some fantastic work in this area. Now, let me just pick up a little bit of a personal story in this, because, I come from the world of large-scale energy, and some of my colleagues or industry peers, we have always been working with the large organizations. And yet, in the last 2 to 3 years, maybe a little longer, we have seen this interest coming in clean energy, diversified clean energy fuels for various applications, including for cooking. So initially, it was just a kind of a little bit of a hobby dabbling into it. And then suddenly we realized that this is for real. Okay, that's one part of it. We also saw some transformative work on clean cooking because through the Ujjwala scheme of Government of India, and this I'm talking about the India story here, we saw that happen, and we saw 100 million households getting connected in record time to clean cooking fuels. We've also seen the downside of that because, those many connections, sustaining that has been difficult. Supply chains have been very difficult to maintain. Those cost points, though they have been fairly subsidized, it's still difficult for those people on the margins. So suddenly we find people going back to the old means of, cooking. And that has its own costs, as we all know, and then, of course, I'm not talking about the, balance of payments and the import bill, which comes along with imported LPG, because India imports most of its LPG, 90% of its LPG. So we've seen that downsides to it. So not as a replacement for something which is as large scale as Ujjwala, but as a supplement to some of those measures. Now, how does alternate clean cooking fuels stack up? That's what we are going to talk about today. Just before I hand it over for your opening comments, Christian and Sagun, I do want to mention that, in my work, I work with the Government of India quite closely on various policy aspects, on energy-related policy aspects. This ticks a lot of those aspects which you have to do. It's gender, equality, life, health, quality of life, health, education. It touches everything. Okay, so doing that makes a big difference along with the environmental and climate aspects of things. And yet it's difficult, right? So while I say that we are seeing progress, I think a question around is that what kind of technologies will make progress? What is the ecosystem which you require for that progress to happen? What should be our expectation? How far should we expect this to go? And how does the ecosystem need to come together? Many questions, and I think those are just a sampling of the questions. I can't even say that it's anywhere close to being comprehensive, but those are the kind of things which are on my mind, and I'm sure on the minds of people. So I think I would want you to start with your opening points, Christian and Sagun. I do want to make a point here that we can talk about India or South Asia, but if you want to take a wider stab at Africa and other regions, emerging regions, that would be important as well, because population growth over there is really strong. There's a lot of social challenges there, and yet clean cooking and clean energy can actually transform. We're seeing instances of that. So if you want to go there, it's all yours. Christian.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to come. Setting the scene, I would like to mention 2 facts that are not generally known. Number 1 fact is bioenergy is by far the largest source of renewable energy that we are using as humans, and 40% of that is unfortunately unsustainable. So 40% is cooking on open fires across the globe. 2.5 billion people are doing that with the impacts that you have mentioned. So this is really the elephant in the room. This is the big topic of bioenergy is, can that be changed in a way that is sustainable? And we are looking at a technology that has been basically overlooked up until now. And the technology is utilizing upgraded biomass rather than raw biomass. So upgraded means dried and densified, typically in the form of pellets, and using them in stoves that are so-called gasifying stoves that first convert the biomass into a flammable gas and then burn the gas. Doing that has the result that, first of all, there is no smoke generation at all, and there is a very high efficiency of combustion. So if you combine these two things, gasifying cook stoves and pelletized biomass, you arrive at a clean cooking solution that has a number of advantages, and the most important one being the affordability. These cook stoves are available for something like 2,500 rupees, so not a huge investment. And the fuel is by far the cheapest fuel on the market. So it's about half the cost of LPG, 50% lower than subsidized LPG, a third of what electricity would cost. So pelletized biomass is a very cheap fuel. And you may ask, well, why has that been overlooked so far? And there is a very obvious reason for that, and that is pelletized biomass has not been available in many parts of the world, particularly where it's needed most. Because in the more developed economies, in Europe, in America, Canada, in China, pelletizing biomass is a very common procedure. The market has been growing exponentially over the last 20 years and is now 50 to 60 million tons of produced pellets worldwide. So it's not a totally uncommon fuel, but it's uncommon here, it's uncommon in Africa. And our ambition as WBA is to support the introduction of this fuel, to support the production of pellets, because that is the prerequisite to use this clean cooking technology. Now, the exciting thing about the situation in India is that the government has mandated to use biomass as a co-fired fuel in coal-fired power stations. And I think the mandate is 5%, which amounts to 30 to 40 million tons of pellets. So if that mandate is to be achieved, you will have supply chains developing across the country to produce this fuel, mainly from agricultural residues, which is very meaningful because right now they're burnt in the fields, creating air pollution, not generating value. And if you pelletize that, you will have both a fuel for co-firing the power stations, but also for clean cooking in the countryside. And I find that is a very exciting opportunity. I should also mention that these cook stoves are being produced in India. They are, in fact, an Indian company is world leader in technology of these cook stoves. So it's EcoSense company here in Aurangabad that is producing these stoves. So I think this is an opportunity that is just about to emerge. And yeah, that's my opening statement. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And I think EcoSense was carried in the New York Times fairly recently, if I'm right. And it's something which is odd, right? It's so close to home, and yet we don't really recognize that. And a part of it is also behavioral, because we have seen the old biomass-based things to be, old technology backward, whereas you see, gas as forward. I mean, it's even the policy making, sometimes it's been there, but I think that can change, right, with all of this?
It can be changed, but it's not easy to change.
It's not easy to change.
So biomass is widely recognized as a fuel of the past, and it isn't. It's going to be the second largest source of energy by 2050 if we think about the projections of the International Energy Agency. We cannot supply our energy needs without using bioenergy. And bioenergy can be used in an entirely clean way. Biomass can be used without generating smoke and other
And the
negative side
effects.
effects.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. I mean, you've given the headline talk over there. Biomass is not the fuel of the past. I think that it makes great headlines. Sagun.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thank you all for coming to this discussion on clean cooking here. I think an event around energy, so much of the focus is on modern energy, things like aviation fuel and electric vehicles and all those things. And the reality is that for a lot of people, the most basic energy need is probably cooking, right? You can maybe survive for a while without electricity, but you need some way to cook your food, right? And still, over 2 billion people in the world don't have access to a way to cook that doesn't hurt them or kill them or damage the environment. So it's a really serious issue. Often it's been left to governments or donor groups to try to figure this out, right? And often the solution that has emerged to clean up cooking has been to subsidize fossil fuels, particularly LPG, right? Now LPG is a great fuel, and I think the achievements here in India have been remarkable, but it's expensive, and there are challenges with it. And so our approach about 10 years ago was to really look at that question from first principles and say, what other approaches could really work in the parts of the world that have been left behind in the clean cooking transition? That's when we came upon ethanol, bioethanol, as a very attractive fuel. This is a renewable liquid fuel that can be made in many agroclimatic zones from many different feedstock sources. It can be made at small scale, it can be made at large scale. But it's not really been introduced as a cooking fuel at a large scale anywhere in the world. Most countries have bypassed in their transition from biomass fuels to LPG and electricity, right? So we focused on that, and our research showed us that there were a few key areas that needed innovation. And so our company, KOKO Networks, is focused on delivering those innovations. And today, 10 years after we started, we serve about a little over 1.5 million households in Kenya and Rwanda with a clean cooking solution based on liquid bioethanol. Okay, so that's the background of who we are. I can tell you a little bit more about how we came up with these ideas and what we think the potential of this is and what should be the role of government, but I'll let you tell us which direction we
Why
want to
don't you go ahead? I mean, talk a little bit more about that. Sounds good.
Okay, so seeing that there might be another approach, another type of fuel, right? We looked at that. We said, how do you go about trying to innovate a completely new system? Probably the best place to start is with the end user, right? Too many energy solutions are designed based on policies or based on research, and they're not designed based on the end user, right? So you go and you spend time talking to the people who actually cook, right? And what is it that she wants, right? She wants a solution. From our research, we found there were 3 key drivers for what makes a cooking solution attractive for a mid to low income household in the developing world. First was the performance of the cooking solution. Okay, and there are many aspects to what constitutes good performance. LPG really approximates that to the best. I mean, it's quick to start, you can control it, it's very safe, there's no smell, it doesn't make my pots dirty, which means I don't have to spend 20 minutes every day cleaning my pots. There are a whole bunch of requirements that you can really understand if you spend time with the user, but performance is very, very important. Second thing is price. Yeah, so if the product performs, then it needs to be affordable for me. And price is also not a very simple thing to understand. Price actually has at least 3 components to it. What is the upfront price of your solution? How much do I need to pay to get access to your cooking solution? Second, how much do I need to spend every month or every week to keep using your solution? But the third part, and this is where LPG falls short, is what is the minimum bundle size for me to buy your fuel? How much money do I need to have in my pocket to be able to refill or to be able to use your fuel? LPG, typically you have to get a full cylinder, right? And that very few people have that much money in their pocket at any time. Okay, so price is the second thing that you have to solve for. And then the third part that was very interesting is proximity. So if your fuel is not available close to where I live, even if it performs really well, even if the price is attractive, I'm not going to adopt it regularly, right? And that's just a human factor, right? So you take those 3 things and you start to solve for them. And so what we've done is we've designed from scratch an ethanol-based cook stove, modeled based on camping stoves that have existed for decades, but it's uniquely tailored to the needs of urban African households, right? And so we design that, we manufacture that here in India, and that's what we market in East Africa today. But with the cook stove comes a refillable plastic canister. This is about a 2.5 liter container, And that's how people get access to the fuel. But these canisters are not stocked in shops like Coca-Cola or beer. Rather, people refill their canisters by going to a neighborhood shop that is within just a few hundred meters of their household. And in those shops, they find dispensing machines. So we've designed fuel dispensing machines, very much like ATM machines for fuel. So these are about the size of a refrigerator. We have almost 3,000 of them operating now in East Africa. And customers can go, insert that refillable canister into that machine, and dispense the amount of fuel they want for the day. They can spend as little as 30 cents, if that's all the money they have today, or they can fill up the whole canister for $2. We don't charge a different price per liter based on how much you purchase, right? And I think this is one of the only fuels where you actually have that, because our cost to serve does not change whether you're buying a small amount or you're buying a large amount, right? And customers just love that. Today, more than 70% of households are not filling the full container, right? And that's gotten worse over the last year with the cost of living issues. But it's a direct indicator of the fact that bundle size and proximity are really important, right? So you get the idea. So three key elements: designed a cooking solution and a fuel delivery mechanism for that. The other part you have to solve for is the upstream part. Where is the fuel coming from, and how does it get to these refilling machines? For that, we've taken advantage of another great feature of ethanol, which is that ethanol can ride on top of the existing liquid fuels infrastructure. So in Kenya, we partner with Bioenergy, which is the Shell operator in East Africa, and they basically use their existing fuel depots, their existing underground storage tanks, their existing tanker trucks that have been used to move petrol, diesel, and kerosene. They use exactly that same infrastructure to keep our network of 3,000 dispensing machines full, right? And so thereby we're able to completely take advantage of the existing fuels infrastructure to introduce a fourth liquid fuel that just happens to be renewable and carbon neutral, and that's how we're able to quickly drop in a solution that can go to scale at the rate that it has so far in East Africa.
So is it fair to say that, the way in my childhood I've seen kerosene cooking stoves being used and being refilled, that has been modernized by filling those canisters into 1.5 liter canisters, but essentially doing the same thing. Now those cook stoves used to be fairly cheap. Right. Is there a cost angle in this one which worries consumers?
Yeah, so we took a very different approach to the cook stove itself. So the cook stove that we ended up designing with our customers is actually a very high-end product. And in fact, it's typically one of the most valuable things that our customers have in their home. It costs us about $100 to produce it and get it to the customer. But of course, our customers can't pay that much, right? And we don't want to lend money to the customers. The critical enabler here is carbon finance. So when households switch from using a deforestation-based fuel like charcoal to using a renewable fuel like ethanol, there is a significant measurable emissions reduction. And we've been able to capture that and monetize that through the voluntary and the compliance carbon markets to bring in a significant non-government subsidy, essentially, that helps us cover that upfront price. So today, we sell the cook stove with the canister and 2 refills of fuel for less than $12.
Right.
$12, right? That's what drives adoption. Plus, we've been able to use the carbon value that's coming in to help buffer changes in the price of ethanol. Right? In the last couple of years, ethanol prices have been at record highs due to macro factors. So we've been able to buffer that by extending a non-government subsidy to customers. And that's getting to the heart of the justice angle. Right? We have buyers of our carbon who see that putting $20, $25 a ton, right, to reduce their emissions into a program like this that enables people to access a clean cooking solution and use it regularly, they see that as a fantastic way to meet their immediate carbon emissions reduction goals, right? Okay. And so we have companies around the world that are willing to make that trade, and we're able to show how that value is almost entirely being passed through in a very transparent way to these customers.
We'll come back to that point, because I think that's one of the key things for mainstreaming this whole thing, given that there is a deficit between the $100 which will cost versus what you can really charge the customers. Mm-hmm. Before that, Christian, to you, the problem with biomass always has been the supply chain. Okay, whenever anybody who's a part of the organized sector wants to come into biomass, lots of people have burned their fingers, hands, everything, because of the supply chain challenges. You set up a unit and suddenly, and this could be MSMEs who put up something and then suddenly realize that either their biomass is not available or has alternate uses, or things pop up which you didn't expect. Are you seeing that to be a dampener, or you think that the sector, the supply chains will mature and this will be reliable enough?
The experience with pellet use in other contexts has been, as soon as there is a fuel, a fuel market, the supply chains are being set up because there is business in this.
Right.
And I mean, in Europe, for example, it was, again, I mean, like in the case of cocoa fuels, it was the oil traders that took advantage of a new fuel, and they just got a slightly different truck. It's not a tank truck, it's a silo truck, but fundamentally they did the same thing. They just adopted the fuel because they saw there was a market, and now the supply chains kind of very quickly were established. So I think once the market is there, there will be enough interest of lots of actors to kind of use this new market and do business in that market, and that will establish the supply chains. But of course, there is with the pellets there is a very particular chicken and egg problem in the beginning, and that is who is going to produce the first pellets if there is no cookstove market yet, and that is what keeps things from developing in many places. And that's why I find the situation in India so interesting, because now the supply chain is being developed for a different market and will make the fuel available if there are people that kind of are aware of this opportunity and take advantage of the opportunity, and if the utilities understand that this fuel is something they should also share with local communities and not just pour all of it into the power plant.
Right. No, I think those suppliers will go where they see value maximization for them. The problem with the advantage of the power plant is that you can put everything in one go and then you take your money back home. This involves distribution networks, not just the supply chain, but distribution networks, which become super important. And that's why, Sagun, the points you were mentioning, riding on the supply chain of others and distribution networks is important. You want to make a note?
No, absolutely. I think that we joke that in trying to reinvent cooking, we had to reinvent retail in these markets, right? Because the informal retail channels were too inefficient and too expensive to distribute a product that doesn't have room for higher retail margins, right? And this is why, first of all, finding a way to partner with the industry that has the arteries for a liquid fuel was very important, because we could not make huge investments in depots and tanker trucks and everything else. We needed to find a way to piggyback off of all that infrastructure, and then we needed to have a very, very efficient way to retail the fuel. So even the packaging cost of bottles and canisters and stuff for fuel, we had to make sure that none of that was disposable, none of it was a waste. So today we have zero packaging cost because every canister is refillable. And those are the little things that really matter to be able to achieve scale and to achieve the economy that's required to best serve customers.
Right. So both of you have been very positive about the role of the large fuel companies. You mentioned about them, Sagun, you mentioned about them as well. Yet we see that sometimes they are going back to the traditional businesses because in some sense that's easier. So while you see the opportunity for piggybacking on them and they actually using their networks, is this more hope, or is this something which is we're seeing catching momentum? Both of you.
I think that the existing energy companies in these markets are large operations. They've made many long-term investments. Many of them are committed. Leaders are committed to making a transition. They don't see the pathways today to do that, frankly, right? And so what we found is that they have assets, they have capabilities that are very expensive to build from scratch. And so by creating a fair operating partnership with them, you can find a win-win solution. Of course, they're not everything we agree on. Many of these companies on the other side are lobbying for fossil fuel subsidies, right, which make business for us very difficult, right? So many of their distribution partners see us as competitive threats in the market and look for ways to try to block our progress, especially with the rate at which we've been growing. So it's a mixed bag, but I would say that on the whole, there's an urgency here. And you have to think about what is the best way to be able to move forward in markets that are very difficult to operate in. And I think you have to respect what has been done by the industry and what they've been able to finance, right? And find ways to get efficiency by taking advantage of that. And so that's how we look at the relationship.
And Christian, what's your observation on that?
My observation is, in the context that I know, the business of oil industry has been actually going down. And so they need to look for other ways of doing business. And there is so much talking about phasing out fossil fuels that they have to scratch their head on what is our future. And that is creating the interest in alternative fuels.
Okay. Switching tracks a little bit, and we have just about less than 4 minutes now. And Sagun, to you, are digital technologies also playing a role in all of this? Today, are you a kind of a digital first company as well, like many of them are trying to be?
Absolutely, and it surprises people when they see how much software is required in running our business. We use digital technologies in almost every part of our business. Our customer relationship is anchored around a wallet. So customers pay for KOKO credit the way they pay for airtime, so that when they go to the dispensing machine and they insert their canister, the system automatically recognizes them, right? And we can use that to track how much fuel is each household purchasing, and we can offer promotions and do all the things that the mobile phone companies do to you, right? And that's never been applied in the clean energy space, right? But that's very important to build a direct customer relationship with the customers. On the logistics side, for making sure that fuel is moving around safely, each of our dispensing machine has dozens of sensors, and all that data comes in real time into our operations center. It looks very much like an operations center for, again, a mobile phone company, where each of our dispensing machines is like a mobile phone base station. So there's a lot of hardware and software technology that's required. And by collecting all this data, as you can imagine, we're able to just keep refining and improving the operating efficiency and the safety of the network, and ensure that the quality of service we can offer to customers is really high. We have a metric that makes sure that none of our dispensing machines is ever out of fuel. And we're able to live up to that thanks to the data and the technology.
Right. Just one last one for you on the carbon price. In the voluntary market, you're getting $25, $30. Is that adequate? And I'm not asking specifically for you, but I'm hoping that there'll be others who will be doing similar things, and they need to find it to be attractive. So is that more or less in range of being attractive?
Yeah, and we can talk for a long time about carbon markets. And what's been happening in the carbon market is, of course, this bifurcation between the low end, very poorly developed projects that have a lot of issues with them, and rightfully are coming under scrutiny and are hopefully getting washed out, and then other projects that are much more at the premium edge, where the value of the emissions reductions, the permanence of it, is very clear, right? And where there's a lot of actual substance on the ground that underlies the value of the actual carbon emission. And so that's the space that we play at. And of course, pricing varies, and there's usually a long discussion today because many of the market mechanisms that need to exist are still not in place, and we wait patiently for the Paris Agreement to be implemented and for a mechanism to form. That today is probably one of our most significant barriers to upscaling in many countries at once, is that every carbon transaction we do is essentially like an equity raise. You have to go meet the partner, spend lots of time together. They need to scratch deep below the surface, have a great deal of confidence that they're not going to be mentioned in the next Guardian article because they bought carbon from you. So it's a very, very deep relationship that we have to form. And we do that because we fundamentally believe that the carbon markets and the carbon regulatory mechanisms will emerge, they will form, they will stabilize, and eventually the carbon emissions reductions that are being generated by our consumers will be tradable as a commodity and will generate the returns that will help to cover our cost of capital. And so at the price points we're getting today, yes, absolutely, we're able to run this business and scale this business. But over time, as the price of carbon goes even higher, and we expect that it will go even higher, the applicability of our solution will extend from the urban areas where we're really focused today where people are paying higher cash prices for cooking energy, it'll expand more and more to rural areas, places where the fuel, the cocoa fuel that they're purchasing, may be extremely low cost or maybe even would be free thanks to the value of carbon.
Okay. I think that's the signal for us to close. I'm just tempted to violate that and ask you one last question. Beyond those two technologies which we are focused on today, which is pellets, biomass pellets, and the ethanol, if you had to pick one additional technology which you see having a lot of future, what would that be? Christian first, and then Sagun.
I think biogas is a very good choice in rural areas.
Okay.
Because it's based on existing raw materials, and there are some really interesting examples of standardized designs of biogas plants that can deliver at a reasonable price fuel.
So biogas for you, Sagun?
Yeah, short term, I would agree. I think there's a lot of potential in biogas and biogas technology innovation to make it more and more relevant and accessible. I think in the mid to long term, the use of electricity for cooking, I think, has potential. I think as with many technologies, there's a lot of hype right now about how quickly it can have an impact. But I think in the long term, I think electricity can be a wonderful cooking solution. We're doing some research work in that space as well. We think there's good complementarity, eventually a transition in the long term to green electricity being available at very affordable prices with a very easy supply chain behind it.
All right. Well, thank you. That's, again, a short but a fascinating panel. Again, as a good consultant, I always take away good learnings from this so that I can narrate it elsewhere and use my megaphones, some social media megaphones to talk about this. I'm definitely going to talk about this. This has been a very, very engaging panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.